It's time, people. I have an angry dwarf, and there's one grudge I'd very much like to get settled today. You know what's happening. I'm playing as Grombrindal, and we're here to take out Malekith as fast as possible. Now let's take a look at how the campaign actually starts. I have a nice starting settlement that's not very defensible, but very good for military buildings. And I start with a runesmith to accompany Grombrindal. We got the usual dwarf tech tree, and I'm gonna spec the bottom end so that we can play more aggressive today. But why exactly do we want to rush Malekith so aggressively? Well, the story is pretty long, but in short, I think Malekith promised on Grombrindal's deathbed that he would never attack the dwarves or something. And like immediately after Grombrindal died, he went back on his promise. And this made Grombrindal so mad he came back from the dead to finish his grudge. And essentially that's what we're doing today. Now we're gonna auto-resolve the first battle, and look at that. I'm pretty sure Drink to Victory is new, but I haven't played the dwarves in a while. Anyways, Conquest up north is pretty easy, and I'm recruiting miners because blasting charges are amazing versus elves. Next up, I'm gonna give my infantry +10/+10 melee stats, and this basically gives them all gold chevrons. Now, I could give my army's casualty replenishment rate, but Grombrindal already has that in his skill tree, and I'm not expecting to take too many battles. Another option makes Grombrindal much stronger, but since most of the strength is in my army, it just makes way more sense to buff them instead. And the last option has upkeep reduction, but at the moment, I have enough income to support a full 20 stack. And since the focus is on beating Malekith with my one army, upkeep reduction is probably not going to do much for me in my first 25 turns. Last but not least, I'm grabbing Grudge Throwers, and this should make sieges much faster. And now that my early game Doom stack is basically done, it's time to finish off Malekith. At this point, I don't intend to hold my original territory, so let's go ahead and deconstruct those military buildings. Now there is a Skaven siege battle we have to win, but really it's not too difficult. However, I do have to be careful and minimize losses. In Warhammer 2, Malekith would expand very quickly with his pretty scary early game armies, and I don't want to take those on with a badly auto-resolved army. Thankfully though, I do have a few tools to take this city efficiently. I take the walls with my gyro bombers, and after I've secured them with my miners, things are looking pretty good. Not to mention my basic dwarf warriors are rocking 55 melee defense, which means they're taking very close to 0 damage in melee. Like, for the record, 55 melee defense makes your warriors about as hard to hit as most legendary lords in the game, if not more. Needless to say, I lost barely any dwarf warriors. Not a bad start for us. Outnumbered 2-1, we only get 200 losses. Now with that battle out of the way, I finally run into the man himself, Malekith, the target that we're aiming for. And lucky for us, his army's already pretty beat up. Now it turns out the Altar of Ultimate Darkness is also connected to my original buildings, so I'm just gonna cancel that construction to get the rest of my blasting charges out. Now all I have to do is end the turn and hope that Malekith stays around. But unfortunately, at the first sight of Grombrindal, he's already on the run. Time to run him down. And in the meantime, I'm gonna keep upgrading my infantry. At this point, my army's big enough to run straight towards Nagaron, so I'm just gonna march stance my way there. And actually, it looks like we've managed to get there before Malekith. So let's go ahead and finally declare war on him, and now his main army is gonna have a pretty hard time reinforcing that city. Now unfortunately, it looks like he has a pretty sizable backup army, and on top of that, a decently sized garrison. Probably a bad idea to declare war on him so early, but hey, I don't mind taking a field battle here to annihilate most of his armies. And if anything, it means I don't have to chase down these armies later. And even better, it looks like Malekith got a pretty bad spawn point. So let's go ahead and get my troops into position. I have Thunderers and Iron Drakes ready to flank, and a whole ton of blasting charges. Grombrindal's gonna move up to tank, and oh boy, I'm getting ambushed by Shades. A little bit of unnecessary damage for me, but thankfully I have Quarrelers to help out. And here we go, the fight begins! And my goodness, is Dwarven Gunpowder glorious. And this, people, is why I decided to take blasting charges. Of course they're not great in melee, but does that really matter if the enemy's never gonna see melee? Probably not. Now anyways, enough staring at cinematics. Let's go ahead and get some bomb drops with our gyrocopters too. I can grab my hammers to flank the dark shards, and I can slowly inch up with my flamethrowers to get these guys off the map. Anyways, the battle's basically done at this point. Might as well hit ×4 speed and enjoy the flamethrowers. Nice, look at that, 460 kills. I can start worrying about replenishment, and all I have to do now is take the city. Now I could auto-resolve this, but because Malekith is still around, I want to play the battle to minimize casualties. Alright, so first things first, let's clean up those walls. Gonna use my blasting charges to scare off the dark shards, and once they're in the courtyard, I can pepper them with my Quarrelers. Seems simple enough, and I can even use point-blank blasting charges to help with the fight on the wall. Still though, the Dark Elves offer staunch resistance, until I get my flamethrowers on the wall. And from there, it's pretty simple. All I gotta do is hit ×4, and they'll hit army losses. And the Iron Drake should be able to get that done in fairly quick speed. right? Maybe I'll just capture their points instead. Let's go ahead and group my units together and just push forwards. There we go, seems like it's going okay. Sure, Grombrindal's the only one that survived up top, and thankfully he's at high enough HP to push them into army losses. Now I may have sped forwards a little bit too quickly there, but hey, what can you do? At least it frees up some space for an ROR and a Slayer too. Let's go ahead and grab a few more levels, and remember, our goal is not done yet. Even though we do have Nagarond, Malekith still has settlements. Really only one more though, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem, right? Well, we'll see. It takes 2 turns to get to Hag Reef, and it looks like Malekith is still lurking around. However, he's still on the wrong side of the forest. So once again, we're beating him to his city. Should hopefully be a pretty simple siege. There we go, not a terrible battle, right? But hey, without settlements, Malekith is now taking attrition. This will force his armies to come and attack me, and as long as those battles go smoothly, I should be good. But once again, ever the slippery snake, Malekith takes another settlement, and so the hunt begins. Or so I thought. The man himself sallies out to come and attack me. An interesting choice by Malekith, but I'm happy he's finally accepting his fate. So we have an interesting battle on our hands. Many of my troops are quite beat up, but I should have range superiority. And to use that to its maximum effectiveness, I've decided to fight in the water where infantry will be moving slower. This should give me more time to make use of my blasting charges and quarrelers. Of course, there are chariots too, the ultimate bane of all dwarves, but these chariots do have a missile attack. And while usually this would be a buff to the chariots, because the AI is designed the way it is, it's gonna treat them like a missile unit instead. So I have less to worry about in terms of my backline, and instead spending most of my time focusing on the front line. Well, all that's left now is to wait for the enemy to come. Of course, Grombrindal wants to get the fight started early though, so we're gonna buff him up and see if he can take out Malekith. And while my infantry do trade pretty well, the 2v1 between Malekith and the Beastmaster do take Grombrindal quite low, and it looks like unfortunately he has to disengage. Seems like I'll have to settle this grudge another day. And actually, the fighting is pretty fierce. A group of Dark Elf infantry nearly punched through my lines, but thankfully some concentrated fire from artillery and crossbows managed to push them back. As for the Beastmaster, he gets a little bit too overzealous, and I'm able to goon him out with Grombrindal and my Runesmith. But Malekith, however, barely manages to escape while I finish off his army. And despite the best efforts of my grudge throwers to finish off Malekith, unfortunately he manages to get away. I still get his defeat trait though, and you bet that Frenzy's gonna help Grombrindal kill him. So this time, we're on the offensive, looking to finally settle this grudge. Grombrindal's looking for blood, and he finally gets that fair fight against Malekith. But can he win it though? It's looking close. But at least for Malekith, I guess close is a little bit too close. He turns to run away, but there really is no escaping an angry dwarf. And with Malekith down, all that's left is cleaning up the rest of his army. Just gotta take out his final settlement now, and we're good to go. And just like that, in 13 turns, Nagarond is destroyed. I got 8,000 gold in the bank, basically 2 provinces, and really the next most imminent threat is just the Skaven. A pretty good position to be in, I would say. And that should be it for now. If you want to try out this campaign yourself, you can buy Warhammer 1, 2, and 3 on sale using the fanatical links below. And if you want to see me stream a campaign like this, make sure to check out the channel, as I'll be streaming campaign pretty soon.